So the SEC is going to be set to announce that it's going to stay with an 8-game conference schedule in 2025. They're going to play the same schools that they played in 2024, just reverse the locations. So that brings up a somewhat poignant question of, and I talked about it earlier in the week on what that my hope eventually would be everybody in college football, at least in the Power Four, would be working on a sort of the same guidelines of what a conference schedule was going to look like, whether it was 8 games or 9 games. You're going to have that disparity in 2025. So the question that in my mind is, what's better? Is 8-game conference schedule better or a 9-game conference schedule better? And I think each has its own advantages, right? And if you're playing an 8-game conference schedule and everybody else that's your competition is playing a 9-game conference schedule, you are without a doubt you have 7 fewer losses, 8 fewer losses. Once Texas and Oklahoma join the conference and it's 16 teams, you have 8 fewer losses, conceivably, because if you're going to play an extra game, that's 16 teams. 8 are going to win, 8 are going to lose. It's 8 losses less that you'll get each week. Not each week, but throughout the college football season. On the flip side, or on, I guess, additionally, with 8 conference, you get 4 home games, 4 away games. It's easier to schedule because you don't have to worry about, okay, what years do I have an odd number of away games? That way I try to get, as many home games in the non-conference schedule, et cetera, whatever. In 8 conference games, I'm going to have 4 at home, 4 on the road, and you can schedule your non-conference accordingly. On the flip side, 9 conference games gets you more frequently against teams in your conference, which I think most people want to see, right? For instance, like Georgia probably wants to see Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, LSU, Alabama, Auburn as frequently as possible, rather than Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Missouri, right? Like they want to go best on best and get excited for game day more frequently than not. Michigan's going to want to play Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, more than they're going to want to play Maryland, Rutgers, Indiana, Purdue, Northwestern, Illinois, Minnesota. So a 9-game conference schedule gets you through your conference opponents more frequently, especially in a situation where you're going to have 16 or 18 teams in a conference. The reason that you all have decided that you are like-minded and are going to play each other is because you want to continue to play each other as frequently as possible. Plus, conceivably, it's 1 extra game against somebody that you are comparable with, somebody that's going to be participating at the same level as you. Because if the Big Ten or whoever else, if everybody else is playing a 9-game conference slate, you could argue, sure, they're going to go out and schedule a ACC school, a Big 12 school, an SEC. They're likely to schedule a MAC, Mountain West, Sun Belt, Conference USA, American, FCS. That's just that's the likelihood, is if you gave them, because that's what the SEC schools do with 8 conference games. Now, a big chunk of them have a yearly rivalry with, you have Kentucky versus Louisville, South Carolina, Clemson, Florida, Florida State. You have situations like that. But for some of the other schools that they don't have a natural Power 5, this is who we play every year in our non-conference slate. They don't have that. Now they should. Should Missouri and Kansas play every year? Yeah, they should. They should. But you don't necessarily have situations like that. So what do they do with an extra non-conference game? They play an FCS school. They play a group of 5 school. Very rarely are they going to say, although we're playing 8 conference games, we're going to go ahead and schedule an additional Power 5 game outside of, Georgia Tech. You just don't. And kudos to those schools that do it. Kudos to Miami, the years that they play Florida State, or I beg your pardon, Florida, the years they play Miami and Florida State. Like, that's good work. I don't think you can argue that the intent of that schedule. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that both of those teams are really good at the same time, or whatever the case may be. But if you have a 9-game conference schedule, you kind of it's almost saving you from yourself a little bit of you know what? Purdue, instead of getting you to play Indiana State, we're going to have you play Minnesota, okay? We're going to have you play Rutgers, Maryland, USC, Nebraska, UCLA, whatever the case may be. It's kind of saving you from yourself a little bit. And at the same time, I've decried the idea that college football has sold its soul to the TV devil. It is a good thing to have 9 conference games that your TV partners are getting a little bit extra bang for their buck than other conferences are, because it's a race to the top for money. Everybody is concerned with how much money they can get from Fox, ESPN, NBC, CBS, Amazon, Apple, eventually TNT Sports. I think if everybody's trying to get to the maximum amount of TV dollars, then you're going to see 9 games be really popular for those, because it's an extra game that they control. It's an extra game week after week after week that the Big Ten Network has control of. And whether or not those things should matter, they do matter. So I think when you sit down and weigh, I genuinely, I don't like, the one thing I don't like about a 9-game conference schedule is some years you have 5 home games, some years you have 4 home games. And I think it's really nice to bank on this, from an SEC standpoint, where playing an FCS school or a group of 5 school stinks. Your fan base doesn't get excited about that and ends up being a noon game that, and that's what I love about college football, is those Saturdays where you're kind of on edge just a little bit. You're a little uneasy about that game because, you know what? That's a team that can beat us, but you're excited for the opportunity. You're excited about being entertained, where there might be a bit of a toss-up of whether or not this is going to go really well for you. And instead of, feeling like going into the game, we're a 40.5-point favorite. You want to limit those games rather than continue to add them to the schedule, I think. Now, I understand the idea of Kent State's going to play Penn State and Alabama so they can have a girls softball team or whatever. I don't know that that's Penn State and Alabama's responsibility. I don't know if that's a Power 5's job to pay off smaller schools in exchange for games. And I don't feel great about that at the end of the day. One, from a capitalism standpoint, if you can't survive on your own without whoring your football team out to get slaughtered, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for you there. And then secondly, it's, as a fan, would I rather see Georgia play Michigan? I would, yeah. Would I rather see a Clemson versus Oklahoma State game rather than a Clemson versus the Citadel? Yeah, I would. And so I think for the sport in general, having those 9 conference games is both a good and a bad, because you're saving yourself from probably a worse game in retrospect. But then at the same time, if you're left to your own devices, are you going to go out and really schedule up? Probably not. So I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know if it's the 8-game or 9-game. I would lean towards 8-game just because the opportunity is there. I don't think many people will take it. The opportunity is there for you if you want to say, hey, we are going to play 10 Power 5 games, and we're going to have, a tough non-conference schedule in hopes that that's going to get us into the college football playoff. I'll believe it when I see it. I think it was Bob Stoops that somebody had said, if you schedule a really tough non-conference in the 14 college football playoff, you're going to get rewarded. And he was kind of like, okay, I'll believe it when I see it. And I don't think we've seen it yet. So I don't think there's an incentive for anybody to really have a challenging non-conference schedule, even with a 12 or 14 team playoff. But I think ultimately I like the 8-game schedule better. One, because it allows for more. If there's a perfect world, right, where everybody in college football got to set their schedules with an 8-game conference schedule, then you can have a little bit more crossover, a little bit more non-traditional matchups than you expect. At the same time, if you are a fan of a team in a conference where there are a big chunk of like, for instance, I imagine that Clemson fans aren't pounding the table for like, we want to play more games against Boston College and Louisville and Pitt and Syracuse. They want to play games against North Carolina and Wake Forest and North Carolina State and Miami and Florida State. So if you're in a conference where maybe there's some schools on the schedule that you're like, I don't necessarily care if we played this team or that team all that often. I think 8 games is a little better because you're not cycling through them as often, and you can still kind of hope that you're going to get those big-time games more often than not. But I don't know what the correct answer is. I want to hear from you. I wonder what your thoughts are. Comment down below. Let me know. Open my eyes if there's something that you see that I don't see. I'd love to talk about it. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you are listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content that we are pumping out here on Saturday Glory. I'll see you tomorrow for the final episode this week of the Daily Huddle with Saturday Glory.